I'm Richard Harrell. I'm one of the original founding board of directors who started the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Award in 1976. And one thing that stands out most about this award is the honesty and integrity of Coach Dodd, which is hard to find today on the field of play for young men. I loved Coach Dodd. Even though I did not graduate from Georgia Tech, I had a great amount of admiration for him and respect. Coach Dodd was a person that always strived to have all of his athletes graduate from college. And it's hard to find that today with the NFL pulling young players their junior year and trying to get them to turn pro. Coach Dodd always thought that education was number one. Even though he never had the opportunity to complete his college education, he said one thing that really stuck in my mind was that young men should strive to complete their education because that's the foundation of life.
I had an opportunity to meet Coach Dodd as a young coach and really knew who he was as a player in high school. I grew up in North Carolina, and Coach Dodd was really an icon during the 50s and early to mid 60s, and had a chance to meet him. I finished school and took a high school coaching job in Charlotte, North Carolina at Myers Park High School, and Coach Dodd came to recruit a couple of our players. Jesse Berry was a longtime assistant with Coach Dodd and actually recruited that area, but Coach Dodd came in, and I was just almost like you're starstruck as somebody you've heard about all your life, and you see this guy and for the first time meet him. And then later I got into college coaching, was a young coach and had a chance to meet Coach Dodd again, and more important than I remember anything else, he remembered me. And but he had a very unique way with people and with players. The stories I've heard through the years, I've spent 53 years in college athletics, and he was one of the ones that stand out when you start talking about the great coaches. And Coach Dodd was very special, and certainly special for the city of Atlanta and Georgia Tech.
Well, I've always wanted to be a football coach from the time I was a sophomore in high school. I was fortunate enough to have good high school coaches, and it made a lot of difference in my life, and certainly me as an athlete. And so I got into college football, and then had a little stint with the Dallas Cowboys. Got into what I really wanted to do, was coaching. And Coach Dodd was one of those coaches that was out there. There was a lot of literature, there was a lot of books, there were a lot of things, fundamentals and just of the game. But I do remember this, the first time we ever played, I was at SMU, and we played Georgia Tech. And I felt like that there was a ghost in that stadium. It just felt like that there was an awe about being at Georgia Tech because of Coach Dodd. And there was so much said about him. I read so many articles and so many books about him, and it was just about fundamentals, fundamentals, fundamentals. And I'd grown up in the Bud Wilkinson era at Oklahoma, and I guess he and Coach Dodd were the guys that I really read a lot about and wanted to coach like those men coached. And they were not only such great coaches, but just great men also.
Well, I come at this thing a little bit differently. I'm a University of Georgia graduate. I worked for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution for 27 years. And as a University of Georgia graduate, I'm one of those guys who has a deep and abiding respect, not only for what Bobby Dodd did, but for what Bobby Dodd stood for. When you talk to people at Georgia and people all over the country, I talk to people like Vince Dooley, who coached against Coach Dodd for his first 3 years at Georgia Tech. And the thing that we'll always remember about Coach Dodd is really not all the wins or all the bowl games that he won or national championships. What we'll always remember Coach Dodd for is the way that he did things, what he stood for, the kind of men that he produces. I think when we have an event like the Bobby Dodd Coach of the Year Award, and you see so much support from Georgia Tech alumni and former Georgia Tech players, they believed in what Coach Dodd stood for, and they want to support that. They want to support the ideals, and Lord knows we need those ideals right now more than we've ever needed them in college football. Coach Dodd believed in the integrity of the academic process. He believed the integrity of the game. He believed, as the Bobby Dodd Award says, that college football should be kept in perspective in terms of life on campus in general. And those are things that Coach Dodd held near and dear to his heart.
I'm Steve Copeland. I'm from Gadsden, Alabama. Had really no idea I was going to come to Georgia Tech when Coach Dodd asked me to come over for a recruiting trip. But my dad had worked in the steel mill over there for 43 years, and all he preached to me and my brother was get a college education. I only came because I'd never been to Atlanta. Got over here and Coach Dodd told me, said, you know, whether you're good enough to play or get hurt, you'll get your education. And all the guys that ever played for him did that. Whether you played it down or not, you got your education. And that was the deciding factor for me, and probably the best decision I ever made. I don't know how I did that at such a young age, but it was a great decision. He couldn't have been greater to me and all the other guys. You could play first team or eighth team, you got tutoring, you got whatever you needed to get your education. And it was just a wonderful experience, and I'll never forget it.
I had the honor back in the 50s of playing football at the University of Georgia. I happened to be there during the 8-year streak that when Georgia Tech beat us 8 years in a row. But one of the great memories I ever had was when I started out at Merrill here in Atlanta. I went by to see Coach Dodd. And you know, I was prospecting like all young people do. And I knocked on his door, and his secretary asked who it is, and I said, it's Jimmy Harper. And she said, Coach Dodd said, some guy out here named Jimmy Harper wants to see you. And Coach Dodd said, oh, I know him, let him in. So I went in and I started telling my story, and I said, Coach Dodd, I'd like to prospect some people from Georgia Tech and you or whatever. And he told me, I never will forget, he said, Jimmy said, all the things that you did for me while you were at Georgia, said, I can't ever repay you for that, but I do want you to know how much I appreciate everything. But if I had any money, I'll be honest with you, I have to do it with some of my boys that played for me. And I did know Coach Dodd for years after that. I started refereeing in the Southeastern Conference in 1963. And I stayed until 1997, 1996 actually. And I was lucky enough to be the official in his last game in the Orange Bowl when Georgia Tech played Florida. And I had a number of games back then, before then, of course, you know, before they got out of the SEC, we did their games, to say the least. And I had several Georgia Tech games when Coach Dodd was there. And I could say without question, he was a gentleman on the sidelines. His teams were tough. They played hard football. And you always had a great respect for Coach Dodd. I think he was obviously a great coach. It's a shame that we couldn't have beat him while I was at Georgia, but things like that happen in life.
Well, I think what a tremendous honor to have had the opportunity to receive the Bobby Dodd Award. Coach Dodd had such an outstanding reputation, and he left such a legacy, and then on top of that, to have the opportunity to come to Georgia Tech and coach where he had built most of his tradition and built the Georgia Tech program into a national power when he was there. You know, I don't think you can go anywhere around Atlanta or anywhere around Georgia Tech that you don't hear Bobby Dodd stories. Certainly he was a huge contributor to the football tradition at Georgia Tech, and all you have to look around and see the Bobby Dodd Stadium and the things that are named after him to know what kind of influence he had on everybody there. So it's a huge honor to be able to say that I was a Bobby Dodd Award winner.
I'm Billy Williamson. I had the great privilege of playing and coaching for Coach Dodd. I grew up in Miami, Florida in 1957, and Coach Dodd came down. I was going to the Naval Academy, and he came down and talked me into going to Georgia Tech, which is probably the best thing that ever happened to me as far as meeting such a wonderful individual and a great coach like Coach Dodd. The first thing that I knew about Coach Dodd is that he made a promise to everybody's parents that if you came and signed with Georgia Tech and played for me, you would be a graduate of Georgia Tech. And as consequences, anything knows about why we got out of the SEC is because we had probably 200 and some guys on scholarship then. Some of them never put a damn pad on, but they graduated, and he made sure they graduated. And that's the greatest gift that I think of any coach that could have happen to them.
Well, growing up in the South, of course, Bobby Dodd was a household word, and everybody that had the grades that was a good player wanted to go to Georgia Tech because he was so much more innovative. And, well, really, they played volleyball on Monday, and they never scrimmaged during the week, and that's why everybody wanted to go to Tech. And, of course, they won all the time. I think 7 straight bowl games. And as I got into coaching, the very first time that I coached against Georgia Tech at Grant Field, I just walked out in pregame warm-up and felt that presence of Coach Dodd. And I was the coach at Duke, and I felt his presence and Bill Murray's. And it was just an honor to be able to coach as a head coach on that field where, you know, Bobby Dodd did it for so many years. And then when the Lord blessed us and had a great year, and I received notification I won the Bobby Dodd Award, I think that was the nicest thing that ever was bestowed on me. And it was such an honor because of the kind of man that Coach Dodd was and the kind of coach and the things he stood for way before anybody else did. And it was just, I just thrilled to death today. It doesn't seem like that happened to me. And just to be involved with the Bobby Dodd Foundation and just have my name in some small way mentioned with Bobby Dodd's, it is the biggest honor I ever received in coaching.
Grew up in Savannah, Georgia, and came to Georgia Tech because of Coach Dodd, and was lucky enough to play football for him for 1956 to 1960. And I guess my greatest memory was our Tennessee game in 1959 when I was playing fullback. And prior to the game, we were walking around the field as we did before we went in and got dressed. And Coach Dodd came up to me about the 50-yard line, and he put his arm around my shoulder, and he said, you know, this place is what I helped make, and it sure would mean a lot to me for us to win here today. Well, him saying that to me really got me fired up, and I really played the game of my life. And I look back on it, I don't think I did anything that we were supposed to do that had been scheduled, but nobody said anything to me, so I kept on doing it, and it worked out. And we wound up winning the football game, and that game, and then also the big Notre Dame game up in South Bend where we beat them 14-10 in a snowstorm, were 2 great memories. But graduating from Georgia Tech, which is what he wanted for all of us, is certainly the most outstanding thing in my life.
I grew up knowing Coach Dodd from a very early age. I didn't play with him or for him, but my dad did from 1948 to 1952. And after my dad left Georgia Tech, and later on in years after I was born, we kept a close association with Georgia Tech. And Dad would, take me down to the school, and particularly during spring football, and we would, spend some time on campus. And then always the Georgia Tech freshman game seemed like to be an annual event every year. Later on in life, it was my mom and dad's 35th wedding anniversary, and I just had I had just drawn a blank on what I could get for my mom and dad for a present. And my dad had an office in his house, and he had all his memorabilia from Georgia Tech and the latter part of his years. And as I looked around in there, I discovered that he didn't have anything signed by Coach Dodd. So I called down to the school, figuring I wouldn't get anybody, and or not be able to get through to anybody. And the secretary answered the phone. I told her who I was. She said, "Hold on just a minute." Next thing I know, Coach Dodd's on the phone. And after about a 20-minute conversation of how everybody was and how the family was doing, he asked me, what the purpose of my call was, and I told him that it was my mom and dad's 35th wedding anniversary, which he found it hard to believe. But he said, you come down here this afternoon and we'll find something for me to sign and I'll give it to you and you can take it to your dad as a present. So I went down to Georgia Tech, got the red carpet treatment, went right on into his office. It was just a simple Georgia Tech football, but he signed it. He signed it to my dad, George Morris, and he also punctuated as the greatest player that he had ever coached. So I boxed that up and took it home and gave it to my dad, and I think it was a real special moment between my dad and myself. So that's my appreciation for Coach Dodd, and I know the impact that he's had on a lot of people.
Well, it's an honor to talk about Coach Bobby Dodd. I had a former coach administrator talking to young coaches several years ago. He said coaches in their lifetime will have the greatest opportunity to lead young people up a mountain or down a drain. And Bobby Dodd is one of those that led his people up a mountain. Tried to teach them the lessons about life through the game of football that allowed them to be great leaders, to lead people up a mountain to a better way of life and to honor the God that gave them the talents and abilities. The greatest thing about Coach Dodd is I think he was a coach's coach. I think he wanted to teach everything about winning, and he taught all the fundamentals that it took to be a winner. Same time, I think he taught at the same time go within the rules. He taught through sportsmanship. He thought that was important, the way you played, the way you competed, because in every game when you play, one team's going to win that particular contest, one team's going to lose. The greatest thing he always taught is you can learn from both experiences to make you a better person. And I think the greatest thing that happens is the greatest gift that somebody can have is being a coach, to have that influence on young people if they teach them how to prepare them for life after football is over. And no one's done it better throughout the eons of time, the game of football, than Bobby Dodd.
I'm Ken Sparks, head football coach at Carson Newman up in Tennessee. And of course, Coach Dodd was a guy that when I started my coaching career, that I tried to emulate in a lot of ways, especially the way he handled his players. Did an unbelievable job as far as motivating kids, and of course, you know, that's the name of the game. And he went about it a little bit differently than the old master sergeant probably approach, the old drill sergeant